I'm Meg Sullivan, the Board Vice President for Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to New Works, featuring Patrick Friesen, Hiromigoto, Julie Paul, and Troy Sebastian. Victoria Festival of Authors and the Metro Theatre is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. Thank you to our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, Canada Council of the Arts, the CRD, Government of BC, the United Way of Greater Victoria, and Monroe Books. A special thank you to the Greater Victoria Public Library, who have sponsored this event. Also, thank you to Mo's Home Collection and Poppy's Floral Art for providing our lovely background today on stage. Because of COVID protocols, we ask that you keep your mask on during this event. There will be no intermission, but if you need to find the washroom, you'll find it just up the stairs and through the lobby. Closed captioning is provided and can be accessed through your phone or tablet. And just a reminder too, at the end of the event, books will be available for purchase and signing. Now on to our panel. This panel is moderated by Eve Joseph. Eve lives in Victoria and works on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen people. Her 3 books of poetry were nominated for the Dorothy Livesey Award, and her work, In the Slender Margin, was published by HarperCollins in 2014 and won the Hubert Evans Nonfiction Award. Her most recent book of poetry, Quarrels, won the 2019 Griffin Prize. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, both online and in person. It's just so beautiful what they've done here. I love the tables. Troy and I were saying we hope they don't go back to us sitting really close together. It looks great. Thank you, Laura, and your team for all the work you've done. I can't imagine all the moving pieces. You've done a superb job. We're fortunate tonight to have 4 very fine writers, Patrick Friesen, Julie Paul, Troy Sebastian, Nukko Akum, and Hiromigoto, who will all be reading and discussing new works. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that these readings and the festival are taking place on the traditional unceded lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. In 1974, I came to the island with my ex-husband. When I went through this, I kept saying late husband. he thought that was quite funny when I told him. Floyd Joseph of the Squamish Nation. And I'll always be grateful for the welcome we received here, the generosity, the friendship that has sustained my family over the years. I just want to mention that one of the ways to learn more about the history of this place is to visit the Signs of Lekwungen. It's a series of 7 carvings by Coast Salish artist Butch Dick. They're spindle whorls in cultural landmarks around the city. And you can Google Signs of Lekwungen. It'll bring you to the Songhees website, and you'll get a little map of where those are. And the reason I bring it up is it's an opportunity to understand the history in a way that you won't get in history books. So just wanted to mention it. So thanks again for coming. Let's settle in and hear our readers. Our first reader is Hiromigoto. Hiromigoto is an immigrant from Japan who gratefully resides in Lekwungen territory. Her first novel, Chorus of Mushrooms, was a recipient of the 1995 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book in the Canada and Caribbean regions, and co-winner of the Canada-Japan Book Award. Other titles include The Kappa Child, awarded, excuse me guys, awarded the 2001 James Tiptree Jr. Memorial Award, and Half World and Hopeful Monsters. Her first graphic novel, Shadow Life, was published to great acclaim in March 2021 with First Second books. I should add that although Hiromi does not think of herself foremost as a poet, her poem, Ali Bird Ali, was shortlisted for the 2020 CBC Poetry Prize. Please welcome Hiromigoto.
It's such an honor to be here today, and I'm kind of nervous because it's been a while since I've been live, and it feels all very strange, but also marvelous. Thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. I'm just going to delve in. Most of my major publications have been in fiction, novels which centers the lives of Japanese North American women with focus on gender, the body, feminism, queer lives, and the fantastic. These temas continue to be areas of relevance and interest to me, but for the past several years, I haven't been able to write in the same ways I used to. An aspect of my writing process is that it is a kind of faith-based engagement. I need to feel like what I'm writing matters. Otherwise, why do it at all? Firstly, I need it to matter to me, and if I intend to publish it, it needs to matter to others. I need to believe this, otherwise the writing feels tinny and false, the taste of ashes inside my mouth. During these times of climate crisis, mass extinctions, the legacy and realities of living in a country formed from genocide and the ongoing systemic racism which negatively impacts all Indigenous peoples and people of African descent, I find that I'm unable to tap into the faith and joy of writing fiction in the ways that I used to. Those stories were important to me during the time they were written, but now it's a different time, and I am not the same person. Thus, I found myself taking a great many photos of birds, plants, animals, fungi, and in time I began writing creative nonfiction. The desire to make art, to create something, arises inside of me at an individual level, but I'm inspired and taught by a vast and interconnected world, a world that is only one small part human. A little beauty every day. When I was a young child, my family emigrated from Japan. After working for a Japanese Canadian mushroom farmer in Surrey for a few years, my parents borrowed money from the bank and a local patriarch and set off to start their own farm on traditional Kwantan land. My parents had been in their early 20s when they first met each other in a Christian church in Miyazaki. They remained Christians throughout their lives. My siblings and I were forced to attend church with our parents until we left home for university. Some of my siblings were Christians as children. Although I appreciated many of the Bible stories that I learned, I knew that I did not feel faith in the ways that it was spoken about in Sunday school and the adult sermon. I did not believe that Jesus literally rose from the dead and that he could save us from our sins. I did not believe in miracles. How does a person decide what to bring with them from one country to a new life in another? A young family of 4 with little money could not afford to have delivered every meaningful object. How did my okasan decide which items were important enough to carry into an unknown future? One of the things my mother chose was a small box of cards. Printed upon both sides of each card was a verse from the Bible. They were meant to provide some guidance or encouragement, inspiration for the day. On the mornings when there was a little extra time, my mother would draw one from the little box and read aloud in Japanese. The vocabulary was beyond my understanding, but there was something about the ritual of it and the element of chance that appealed to me. I did not have Christian faith, and not long after moving to Langley, I lost faith in my parents, a faith that I did not begin to redevelop again until I was well in my adulthood. I was not completely adrift, however. I had my grandmother, my obachan, who literally served as my cornerstone throughout my childhood. And there was the land. My father bought an acreage in an area that was populated by recent immigrant farming folk, Germans, Swedes, Taiwanese, as well as low-income white folks who rented, hippies who kept some goats and grew weed. Our acreage was a mixed deciduous and coniferous forest, An area had been cleared for the mushroom farm, as well as a kind of field lawn section near the house. During the long periods of rain, a small pond would form in the lowest part of the yard. Water striders would dimple the surface as they skittered across their liminal lives. If I did not have to work at the farm, my daylight hours found me in the forest building my lean-to or beside the pond looking for pussy willows, tadpoles, salamanders, snakes. I'd watch ants busy back and forth on their pathway of labor, gazed upon the patience and deadliness of spiders. In the spring, I collected early tender bracken with my grandmother. June, I picked plump salmon berries, and later in the summer, collected the smaller tart orbs of huckleberries. I followed the change in seasons through the budding of leaves, blooming of flowers, sweetening of berries, the flight of geese. On the days when discord slammed doors and smashed dishes in the sink, when violence swelled and raised voices, I'd bolt from the house and climb to the top of the solace tree. What kind of tree were they? Not cedar with their gently sloping limbs, not pine with their long needles. Were they fir? Solace Tree was taller than our two-story home, and the vantage point offered me a vision of a distant horizon that set my thudding heart free. Freedom was a treetop and the sweet, sharp scent of sap. In the spring of 2016, I began tweeting, "A little beauty every day," and it is a practice I continue. In addition to my regular online activities, I make sure to post a photo of something beautiful from the natural world. It is a daily reminder to myself and for anyone else who needs it that it is possible to move the human-centric frame even just a little and observe something that can lift you from yourself and have you perceive that you're part of a bigger web of life. This call to see beauty in the everyday isn't a trick to distract us from the many critical issues facing our global futures. It is a reminder that we need beauty as much as hope and love. A little beauty every day are my love letters to the world, a world worth living and fighting for. Our high-speed wireless lives can see us splitting ourselves and our attention onto multiple platforms. Technological advances are not necessarily making our lives easier and better. Loneliness is rampant. It is too easy to fall into despair. The internet is like a black hole, and I can plunge into it chasing one headline after another, essays followed by articles onto reports, rants, pleas, until all light has been sucked from my life and I'm empty, lost. During these times, when I have been at my bleakest, the beauty and the complexity of all living beings have shown me non-human ways to find my way back home. In observing a little beauty every day, I am orientating toward a wider life, to put us human in our proper place, with and in relation to all other living beings on this planet. It is like a call, and also a prayer in some ways, for if I have faith of any kind, it is faith in life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hiromi. I'm struck, in listening to you, I was struck by how the natural world feels like a kind of activism, which is not how we usually think about things. Right. Patrick Friesen, with whom I just happen to live, has published more than a dozen books of poetry, a book of essays, stage and radio plays, and has co-translated with Per Brask 5 books of Danish poetry, including the Griffin-nominated Frayed Opus for Strings and Wind Instruments by Ulrika Gernes. He has been shortlisted for the Governor-General's Literary Award in Poetry and won the Relit Prize in 2012. and the Fred Cogswell Award for Excellence in 2016. His play, A Short History of Crazy Bone, won the Winnipeg Theatre Award in 2018 for Outstanding New Work. In January 2020, in collaboration with his son, the composer, Nico Friesen, he released a CD, Busan's Bell, consisting of composed and improvised music with text. His new book of poetry, Outlasting the Weather, selected anew poems, 1994 to 2020, was published by Anvil in August 2020. Welcome, Patrick Friesen.
Thank you. And I too am grateful to be on the unceded territory of the Kwangan-speaking people. That's a beginning to recognize that. A little context. When the pandemic began, I became inhabited by my grandmother, Maria, who died at the age of 32 in the second wave of the Spanish flu, 1918. And I'd grown up with stories of her that my father told me. My father was not yet 3 when she died. And so all that came flooding back, and I began to wonder about the notion of memory, its relationship to story, to fiction. How could my father remember anything when he wasn't 3? And yet he told me stories. And in my writing, I'm now telling my stories based on his. So what is that? Maria. Remembering the desolate farm and a creek running through, shimmering fishes where it pooled in a small clearing among the trees. There, in the midst of maps, this unmapped farm, haunted in the fall, haunted by a death. A woman coughing in a fever, a hairpin falling to the floor, her hair undone, and nothing the same again. So the story goes. The story the old man told over the years, in pieces, remembering his young mother drowning in her lungs and calling, terrified. The room turning, and someone closing the blinds to keep something out. The rooster at dawn. This is what was remembered in all the agitation. It was November 1918, and him becoming an orphan. And the orphan asking, who am I when my mother is dead? And who is she? His shoes lost at the creek, pants torn at the knees, and as if a ghost crossed their yard, the dog barked all night. That too was remembered and could be told. 2 horses grazing in the field, harnesses hanging from a fence post. That too, though it had nothing to do with anything. The orphan carrying what no one remembers. Open as a vowel. What I heard was the monk observing his vowels. I imagined a chapel with rosy light from high windows crossing a stone floor, the monk chanting, air entering his mouth, down the trachea to his lungs, and then back out again. A kind of hallucinatory poem, that repetitive cycle of air shaped by its passage into Gregorian song. I saw the oblong O of his mouth, like the mouth of a dying man. I've seen that, and I've known that long, last exhalation of breath, that abandonment. Like William Blake singing hymns as he died, his joyful mouth open as a vowel, his breath released like a vow. This poem has a couple of names in it. Tabakova is a composer of classical music, and she has a particularly beautiful suite of cello with strings. And there is Tadashi Edo, a Japanese Buto dancer. And the word ma here, it's a concept to Buto dance, and it's the space between movements, between gestures. how to make room to empty God and enter, like stepping into a vacant hall, a silent hall, until sound drifts in from behind tired curtains, a confession, like Tabakova's longing cello, and what endures between two gestures, ma, Tadashi Edo making his way, step by half step, along a slick of water on stage, suddenly twisting and thrashing to the floor, bruising his body into emptiness. And those cello notes bending down, sinking into earth. Yes, that longing for the sacred, which is not sacred at all, but dust swept out of the hall, a fly knocking against a window, and the cellist rehearsing outside the door. At one point about a year ago, I came to the conclusion I was not writing separate pieces or their fragments, and so I thought, why not just write whatever I feel like writing, and it's part of one long poem. It's now at 35 pages, and it includes conventional poetry, prose poems, and some straight nonfiction prose. And I've just, each time there's a new piece, I give it a section number. So I'm going to read a few of these sections. Hopefully when it's over and I go over it, I can get rid of a bunch of it and maybe come up with something. Maybe with a haiku. Section 47. And in that thinking about memory, related specifically to a memory of that young woman that died, and the impact that had on her children, and then on my siblings and myself, brought up by our father. These are things you could spot as I grew up. It also made me think about stories and how we create stories out of memories in order to shape some kind of a meaningful narrative for our individual selves, but for our families, for a community perhaps. And that navigation is what really interested me, the navigation through our lives. And as a poet, that means from image to image very often. Fully clothed, she descended the staircase, somehow losing her clothes on a landing halfway down, which is where I greeted her, all motion slowing down to a kiss. And that was motion. Only now is it memory, or the idea of it. Us meeting in a house I no longer remember, except for the stairs. How I got there and how I came away. There were clothes scattered on descending steps. It was motion, you know, because time passed. I am that slack-assed old man I used to watch at the gym. 4 decades past. Not daughtery yet, but living inside someone's ancient skin, wondering where I've been. I've tracked an animal all my life, following its spoor, moving between foot and mind, getting close, but never more than glimpses at night, moonlit eyes in a thicket, and nothing there at first light but scat. Lost, once again, in my age, until I find the track again, and learning how quickly the weather can turn, out there, in the places I walk through, and in here. I am fortunate to have been lazy. About time, someone said, meaning they had run out of patience. But I was thinking it might mean a much bigger thing, where impatience had no meaning. But I forget what came after that. Out of time is what it's come to now, closer to the end than to the middle, but also something about the journey, what we emerged from, monkeys that we were on that arm-dangling monkey path. It is about time, that drip, drip of seconds that takes no time at all. And who remembers? Us creatures vanishing with a last word or two of comfort or conciliation, or perhaps only a silence broken by traffic, or a nurse fiddling with intravenous. Yes, it's all about time. Something to unearth, always to unearth it. The species repulsive, us, in our cruelty and stupidity, working our way toward annihilation. But what to say in all this prosperity and starvation? The vacancy, eating donuts and praising God, and so much malice. Never mind, there are better stories, aren't there? There are memories that cannot fit the story. They are too hard-edged and won't be shaped, simply not malleable, no suppleness to them. An overheated room in the church basement, or a dark suit in a black car beckoning. Stones on the road of a narrative, adding nothing but fear. And who wants to die afraid? These were persistent voices, and insinuating, which entered the fable anyway, but have been knocked about through time, becoming shards, weapons for a while, then flints to light a fire. All embers now, not to be breathed on too often, or ever again. The Old Grumble. Where's this going? The story too smooth, perhaps, even for old feet. Doors slowly closing, one by one. Only the gate to the boneyard remains, where the tale will be bound into a book of invisible ink. It's going nowhere, like all knitting coming apart in time. And is it true that there is a light inside? Or rather, a clearing where everything happened, sunburned and alive? Yes. That's it. And a red dress, I remember. A skittering call of gulls across the water. Is nature the first language, the unspoken language from which all words are born? I mean the silence before gulls, if it's even possible to fathom that. An unfinished mind, wandering, wondering, a microcosm, imagining the grinding machinery of one universe. Just the one is enough for now. Those are not tears in my eyes, but the dreaming. Is this the first water? Is nature mother or mothered of the earth, that spinning planet, out of the darkness of her, out of night and shadows, digging, not flying, finding a way back to what looks like origin, but is only a deep, watery distance? What mothers hold, that distance, and for 9 months, the most intimate voyage. And the waking cry, a pivot from sea to sun, an arrival into fierce splendor. Thank you.
I love that phrase, an unfinished mind. It seems to be essential, actually, to all of the work that we do. Victoria's Julie Paul is the author of 3 short fiction collections, The Jealousy Bone, The Pull of the Moon, and Meteorites, and the poetry collection, The Rules of the Kingdom. The Pull of the Moon won the 2015 Victoria Butler Book Prize and was on the Globe and Mail's top 100 books that year. The Rules of the Kingdom was a finalist for both the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize and the Gerald Lambert Memorial Award. She has just completed a novel and is at work on a collection of personal essays, which hopefully we'll hear about a bit later this evening. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. What an honor it is to be here. A true honor and delight to see everyone in real life. It's fantastic. Thank you. So I think, like a lot of writers, the lockdown locked my writing down for many months, and I had to trick myself into getting back into it. So what I did was use my phone. I had my phone with me. All we could do was walk. So when I walked, I used my notes function on the phone, and I just allowed myself to be silly, grab a fragment from whatever I saw or felt, and just went with it. So, you know, once I thought I saw David Suzuki smoking, so that became a poem, and so on. So I'll start with one of those poems, a prose poem, and then I'll read a little bit of a nonfiction piece that I've been working on for many years, and then sandwich that with another quick cell phone poem. Maybe it was the grass-fed butter that gave me nightmares. Or maybe it was the giant hole in the logic of importing butter from New Zealand. Or the giant hole in the ozone. Wait, isn't that healing? Didn't we do one thing right? I don't miss hairspray. Or maybe it was the giant gap between me and the suffering, and yet I am still suffering, still count myself among them, paper cuts versus daggers. But I woke up dreaming of 3 sick children and me sure I'd gotten the virus from them as I cleaned up their puke and fed them from what I could find in their messy home. And I can't shake the kids from my awareness, all the kids, all hurting, more because of lockdowns, more because of suffering, more because hurting people hurt more people. And it hits me that karma is just another word for tough luck. Another way to wash one's hands of helping. But what can I do? I'm sitting in a meadow of wildflowers, writing this on my new model phone with organic sunscreen on my face, and no one trying to make me suffer just because they're suffering. Although I'm pretty good at doing that to myself. But that's small potatoes, baby ones, that would taste divine, smothered in butter from grass-fed cows. Flown here from a country that got the pandemic right and is led by a brilliant woman. I also dreamt of gifts and winning money that I would likely spend on myself, the way I bought a $200 sweater last month, the exact color of a distant sky. Oh, there is likely little hope for me. I can turn the radio off when the annoying songs come on, and although they haunt me for the rest of the day, if this is all the haunting that today offers up, then I can only call it lucky. Although I also mean ridiculous and unfair. I just need someone to tell me what to do, and I'll do it. But even before I tap out these words, I know they're a pretty little lie. Pretty wildflowers. I take a picture. On my way home, I pass a nest of tent caterpillars and leave the camera alone. So I've been working on this piece about personal space in a very broad sense, sort of what I've been calling the rift, and so I'll just read a little bit from that. So, space, an opening. In the dark before sleep is when I feel it. I let my hand drift off the bed. I reach down and touch the intangible edge. It's like the edge of a lawn, grass and dirt. But beyond that, it's endless, as if the earth has opened up and is waiting patiently. I feel a space, a gap, an opening. What is it? An absence and yet full, a richness, a force. Sometimes I fall into sleep, comforted by the feeling of this familiar scruff in my fingers, as if I've got a hand in the messy hair of a napping lover. Other nights, the space emits a kind of quiet roar, a slight pull on my fingers, not a sucking so much as a caress, encouraging direction. I do not sleep, but my insomnia is not from a sense of impending doom. It's from a sense of feeling more alive. A gaping rift beside me, big enough for the whole earth to burrow into like a hibernating animal, and I'm not afraid? No. It seems strangely that I can relax in the face of such a space, even if it is imagined or sensed. I feel, overall, a sense of freedom. But what is this freedom, and what do I feel it? What to call it? Is it color, birthplace, circumstance? The absence of poverty and the presence of love, ability, support, of having been cherished, of being cherished still? Or can we just say it's good, old-fashioned, multi-layered privilege? I have not lived unscathed, untouched by worry or sorrow. A look back upon my timeline would show a spatter of illness, one that might have gotten me, one that still might. And grief over sudden losses, beloveds gone much too early, or after long-lived lives that still felt too short. All the normal problems of being human, mere challenges when placed against the greater suffering of others. Others. A loaded word, but the divide I resist of us/them must stand. I am dressed in a skin suit of someone else's making, can claim no glory or satisfaction from its hue or providence, but I benefit each and every day. I can let my hand trail in the opening's benevolent atmosphere and call it a comfort. I can imagine an escape. Space, a gap. As a teenager, I felt the presence of something bigger than me when I walked across the bridge over the Clyde River. After every shift, I worked selling sweater sets and pantsuits at the Glen Kitten Mill Store in Lanark, Ontario, the village of 800 descendants of Irish and Scottish settlers from whence I sprung. I carried the day's earnings in a locked canvas bag across the bridge from store number 2 to store number 1. The bag was destined for the metal chute of the village's bank deposit drawer, but while it was in my arms, it was my responsibility, and the river seemed to want it. I pressed the bag tightly to my chest to resist its pull. That Scotiabank is no longer open for business, either because it was robbed too many times or it didn't pay for itself, an irony that isn't funny to the locals. The old folks in the village are lost without their tellers. They don't want pins or machines. They have no home computers or cell phones with which to transfer money through space. Now they need to have someone drive them into the next town to do their banking. A lot of those someones can't drive anymore. A very different sort of gap is what they feel, like a gaping hole in the wall where a cupboard used to hang. I live on the West Coast now, thousands of kilometers from Lanark Village. Friends here laugh when I say my village, find it funny to think that I, white-skinned, blue-eyed, come from a sort of tribe, as if I have a people and they go back millennia. They do. I do. We all go back if we trace bloodlines to the same places, the same gorge, Olduvai. A gap in the earth that birthed us, a primordial space. Is this the gorge I feel beside me? Is that what's pulling at my fingers, wanting me home? Space, a zone. What if the space I'm talking about is not imaginary? What if it's an alternate reality, and you and me and everyone we know are living a life almost like this one, but completely different too? The opening feels alive, like a wound or a mouth, like a door hidden until needed. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear, is a common saying attributed to Lao Tzu, but that's only half of it. The rest goes, when the student is truly ready, the teacher will disappear. Maybe the gap I sense is the gaping hole in my understanding, or the keeper of that understanding. A friend keeping me company, a reflection caught on the surface of a river. Impossible, but there it is. There it is. I let myself drift close to the edge of sleep, trail my hand into the darkness, feel for the ragged edge. Am I taking the gap's pulse, or is it taking mine? Am I feeling for heaven? I am comforted even though the plates beneath my bed are poised for shifting, even though I am completely in the dark. I'll just finish with this cell phone poem. Acrobatic when feeding. My unshaven legs make me tired just to look at them, but the bees go on hitting up the lavender and roses with the same lazy consistency they practice daily, blossom by blossom, an awkward, plodding path to pollen. And so I will call it mimicry, this circuitous journey that normally follows the anthem of a change is as good as a rest, but now, and for the past 18 months, has followed the song of staying put. In the shade of the flowering crab, I read about the mistakes I'm making with chicken thighs, and then a story about how tourism, or the lack thereof, has devastated lives the world over, especially in developing nations. Back to travel levels of 30 years ago, it says. Then I was 22, and it's true, it felt monumental to the common person to cross a border, let alone an ocean or two. What is right? What is best? These questions plague every decision these days. Which lens through which to see this issue? The chickadees squabble over the suet. The breeze feels like a racy whisper. The sounds of blasting and digging at the nearby condo development fade when I focus on my breath. The zinnias push their crayon-bright faces toward the sunlight, the way my cat pushes her jaw into my hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. This might sound crazy, but when I hear you read and when I read your work, but more when I hear you, I get the image of walking along beside you, along Dallas Road, you not saying a word, but me reading your mind. That's what it feels like. Well. You can think about that.
Okay.
Troy Sebastian Nupko Akum is a Tanaha writer from Akum, a recipient of the 2017 Natition Reveal Indigenous Arts Award and a graduate of the Indigenous Writers Program at the Banff Centre. Troy has an MFA from the University of Victoria, where he teaches writing. His story, Takni Pikak, a long time ago, was longlisted for the 2018 CBC Short Story Prize and the 2019 Writers' Trust Journey Prize. He was selected as a 2020 Writers' Trust Rising Star by Lynn Cody and longlisted for the 2020 CBC Poetry Prize. Please give Troy a warm welcome.
Kisu quiet. Good evening. Husukut kukni nausan mirki. Hukaklek nupkuaklam. Hukaklek Troy Sebastian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nupku Aklam. My name is also Troy Sebastian. And wanted to acknowledge that we are here on the Kwanga territory. Big shout out to the Songhees and Esquimalt nations and those people. And thank you for everyone coming and braving the cursed pandemic, which has blighted our lives for 2 years, and risking your life for some brand new writing. So, and for those who are sitting at home and watching on YouTube, thank you for doing that too. I have a short story that's coming out in the Walrus magazine in like a month or so, and this is a portion of that story. So, and it's dedicated to all of those who attended the St. Eugene Mission Residential School in our community. The mission. My hands gripped the wheel of the 65 Impala as we made it over the Rogers Pass. The last of the golden gas station whiskey passed between us. That's not too bad, huh? Raymond clapped. Raymond's mouth slipped at words with a hollow smile. Raymond lost his front teeth steer wrestling earlier that spring, and his speech was slithery and filled with saliva. It's all right, I said, my mind lost upon the road behind me, my knuckles holding the road ahead, steady. The drive had been slower than expected. We'd set out early that morning. Though the traffic was light and there wasn't too much snow to worry about, it was still early yet. The Impala was dragging. The drag got gradually worse the higher up the pass we got. Raymond had talked around the drag enough to boil my blood. He knew not to talk shit about my Impala, but the point was clear, the Impala did drag. I had bought the Impala the week before from Raymond's uncle, Les. Les assured me that there was nothing really wrong with it. Tires? I asked. I got them last summer, Les said. Engine? Sure, fire it up, see for yourself. No drag? No, not really, he replied, counting the cash. The mission was a red brick building where I had once lived for most of the year. A series of smaller ancillary buildings reinforced the mission, as broken and fallow farmlands covered either side of the building from north to south. The St. Mary's River coldly wrought the edge of the mission from expanding farther east toward the river's hoodoos, while to the west, the rail line and the road to town led to Bedlam and Christian civilization. God and Jesus aside, the mission was dedicated to the training and production of farm workers, and such dedication required much faith in Amakustunacha, where winter is present or promising at least half the year, and the other cut between seasons of heat, sun, rain, thunder, and the restless cold that late spring and early autumn, a symmetry of passing lovers, not a land of monotheistic agrarians. Yet we were the soil that the mission ground down day after day, month after month, and beyond. And though the Impala was pushing empty, the ride down from the summit gave us reason to believe that we make it to Revelstoke to gas up. To really know your car, you have to know the tank. It tells you things that aren't measured on the dashboard, what gas it likes, how close to empty looks like hope, and how empty looks like a lost horizon. Somewhere before Revelstoke, naturally, I pulled over to take a piss to let Raven drive for a bit. And once back on the road, I rummaged around the car looking for a map and somehow got caught up in the various items from Les's glove box. Inside, there was a few shells for the 30-06, some fishing line, 2 empty packages of smokes, a 1970 Eaton's catalog dog-leafed to ladies' fashions, and a Department of Indian Affairs pamphlet titled An Indian's Guide to Farming. The pamphlet was more of a fragment than a cohesive work. The text stained from oil and coffee, but one legible page read, An Inventory of Farm Tools and Their Purpose. Field auger, used for divination and fence posts. Small hammer, for fence repair and shed construction. Handsaw, for small woodworks. Scythe, for field harvesting. Looking through the glove box, my mind became a plate of leftover dreams and memories, mostly of the old farm at the mission. Farms teach a lot about pain, how much trauma a body can take before it succumbs, and the futility of a drawn-out death. We slaughtered animals at the mission, and for each task we used specific tools. Each act posed limitations. Reliance on an instrument makes the item too important, an invitation for fallibility. A rusted saw is no good. A hammer with a snatched handle, with a fracture deep in the wood but oblivious to the eye, that's trouble. Too many variables. It wasn't until I saw an eagle's clutch a rabbit's neck with its talons that I knew my own hands offered the solution. Brother Francis. Brother Francis's body was in perpetual flinch. Brother Francis was lean, sullen, and had a confused, homesick look in his eyes that really came to the fore whenever he smiled. That's when he looked particularly lost. When his face stopped smiling, it found that small space of emptiness that it recognized as home. His shoulders had a strength commonly found in hail bale cowboys. And though he was not a small person, Brother Francis moved around nearly silently, appearing without a warning, with a persistent and foreboding calm, like a storm that never fully crested. His fingers were dark, dry, and cracked with bursts and breaches in the skin, and I knew his knuckles well enough. Most of the boys did too. They're the first that I met in the mission. Do you remember what he looks like? Raymond said, as the headlights from an oncoming car framed his bandit eyes. Gupson, I said, jumping out of a dream with fists in terror. What if he has a beard now? Raymond said, picking at the dash for his pack of exports, his eyes on the road. Would we even recognize him, huh? I know him to see him, I replied, my hands aching from their slumber of fists. Raymond found the pack and one-handed a smoke to his lips, flicked the dashboard lighter, waited for the click, and put the hot cherry to the tobacco, drawing in the smoke with collapsing cheeks. I reached for a pack and followed suit. My ache of knuckles and drink woke up too, and we smoked for a moment in silence. Yeah, but it's been a few years, Raymond said, and we was just kids. Jesus, Raymond, I know to see him all right. My words slapped at the Impala's dash. The road was quiet. The only sound were the grinding hum of the Impala's V8 and the slow, slurping breath Raymond took and released in syncopation. We took turns thinking on and forgetting the road in front of us. The road was downhill, the summit lost somewhere miles back. One smoke turned to another as the highway kept running beneath us. We carried on that way as I wound down the pasture window and flicked out another butt, the cherry sparking on the highway behind us. Jesus, Raymond said slowly. Yeah, that's it, huh? Think about Jesus. Would you know him if he shaved? I looked back into the glove box to see if the bullets were still there. They were, rattling around. What the hell are you talking about? Jesus? Raymond? Christ! Exactly, Christ Jesus, our Lord Father, Raymond smiled. Without a beard, you might not recognize him. Raymond was a crazy Indian. Everyone knew this. Back at the mission, he was always in a good mood. Didn't complain about the chow and was praised by Brother Francis for his folded clothes. He read everything at the mission, from the Bible to the pantry cookbooks, and it was Raymond who knew when the bears were near, well before the musk. If Jesus shaved and maybe got fat like Uncle Les, he might not be easy to spot, he said, smiling in a knowing grin of contentment with a hint of, what the fuck are you going to say about that in his eyes? Uncle Les, I sighed. He might have a beard. Nowadays, everyone's got one, not just hippies, Raymond said, pointing with his right hand for emphasis. Hippies, I said. Yeah, Raymond replied, his fingers filling with radio static. Hippies do have beards, I said. Yeah, and hairy women too, said Raymond, laughing me into a good and necessary cry. Not that you'd complain, I said, shaking my head and my smile. Hell no, I like hairy women, Raymond said, as an oncoming semi overtook the Impala and shook the car in a flash of consumer goods. Jesus, friggin' semi-trucks, Raymond said. I fought my way into the mission. Like everyone before me, my first day of school was a shit-kicking. Brother Francis got the older boys to beat me up, and right before we got to our dormitory, we didn't see it coming. A door closed and the room became punches, kicks, and laughter. I worried that my pressed white collar shirt would get stained. Katiti told me to keep my collar clean and dry at the mission, and if I did, I should be okay. But after the first stain, I fought back. Raymond turtled while I dragged my nails across ankles, faces, and the shine of the hardwood floor. Every day after morning prayers, Brother Francis would organize the punch-up. This carried on for the first week until he made Raymond and I fight each other. I knocked out Raymond cold with one punch. He never held that against me. Francis was from somewhere around Enderby. As we drove closer to town, Raymond and I didn't speak to him any longer. We spoke about horses, rodeos, and a woman out in Wardner who held a special place in her heart and her trailer for young bucks like us. We never spoke of our purpose either. The mandate was more than skin deep. It was in the blood. And from what we knew, Francis wasn't in jail, not anymore. When you have someone in, you know who's out. And he was out. Jail stories arrive in letters and diginos told between passing family. And yeah, there was some chance he got killed shortly after he got loose. This happens just as much as going back inside. But Francis was a survivor. He adapted no matter the circumstances. And we searched for him for days in a country I had only imagined, a country he had told me of past midnight, when locations dream into spaces where horses live beyond the paddock. We hunted for him around Armstrong motels and Vernon campgrounds. Bales of hay, broken down Fords, Lazy Susan diners, all were scruff marks on our quest to find him. And we got as far west as Falkland a week after the rodeo ended and found nothing but every reason to leave. The most dangerous place for a skin to be is in a nothing town a week after a rodeo. With no reason to stick around, there's every reason to go missing. Our search found rattlesnake needles, out of sync and restless, but no Francis. Each dream was yesterday's hangover, like a mounted wall calendar falling to a previous month. After missing the rodeo, we checked out every bar we could find. We found out where the skins were gathered and where they weren't. The King Eddie, the National, the Branding Iron, they were all the bars we were welcome. Well, mostly. It didn't take much to feel unwelcome in them places. A woman would like the wrong way I'd look at her, and our old man would get pissed, or Raymond would tell a joke so bad to be funny we'd have a fight on our hands, and sometimes we'd have to run. But mostly we'd stay and fight it out, and someone would buy a round after the bus stop. And those beers were always the best. Those laughs were always true. That's how it went after the mission. It still goes that way.
Thank you, Troy. And all I'm going to see right now for the next a long time in my life is what Jesus might look like shaved. Would we recognize him? Thank you all. So I'm just going to jump in. I was thinking there's, Julie, you've got keep your mask. You guys are okay with our masks off? I was thinking about new work and how it feels exposed and secret at the same time, somehow. A bit, excuse this analogy, a bit like trying on a bunch of party clothes and discarding them all over the floor before you decide what you're actually going to wear to the party. My first question to you guys is, how does a piece of new work begin for you?
Say that again.
How does a new piece of work begin? And how do you know it has teeth?
Well, when I'm writing novels, I have what I call the 50-page rule. So if I often would have a concept or an idea for a character, a dramatic scene, something very visual, or a very strong voice of a character, and I would just start writing. Usually there is a scene that's already in place, and then I'll write, and I'll keep on writing and keep on writing. And if there's enough material, energy, and room at around 50 pages, and it feels like it can still keep on growing and growing, kind of like, the sourdough yeast, and it's like, oh, it's gonna rise, it's not gonna be a bomb. At 50 pages, I think, okay, I think this might be a novel, because there's a sense of there's still more room to grow. But if things close down before 50 pages, I say, oh, I think it's a short story. But I mean, it's just a weird little process.
Mm-hmm. Does that apply to, is that different with poetry when you're writing poetry? Obviously you're not going to write 50 pages. What?
No, yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of sort of like the long epic poems, that some people write that are kind of like a novel in prose form. Those are marvelous. Goals, but no, I don't know. It's just like, it feels like it's just like a different kind of template, a mind template for each project.
Yeah. I'll not going to monopolize you, but one of the things that that interested me in your interview for the festival was how you'll go between genres to stimulate yourself to not repeat narratives, to try not have the same story, but you'll jog yourself. I found that intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, well, I imagine everybody reaches sort of the limitations of one's own thinking. I do when I've been writing for several decades now, and so there comes a moment where oh, am I just talking about the same things I've talked about previously, but in a slightly different form or with different characters, and I think that you can just go deeper and deeper into something. But I think I get, I don't know, kind of distracted by things. And so if I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again, it's like, oh no, I need to change it up. Mm-hmm. And so I think it might be, just taking sort of maybe an easy way out, but I feel like if I hop genres, then I can explore an idea in a different kind of way, because each form has its kind of constraints or its conceits or the ways it shapes itself. And so then I can play around with the material in a different kind of way. It's enjoyable.
Thank you, Hiromi. What else?
Yeah, the different genres are like, if you switch them, they're like a discipline, right? That's what I find, at least. Even within poetry, I've never written a good haiku in my life, but I keep trying, because when I come back from it, I'm paying more attention to the language, or in a different way. And if I move to theater work, that opens up into conversation and so on, right? So each one has a separate discipline that affects the other one, I find.
Mm-hmm.
And Patrick, how does new work start for you, and how?
Mostly it starts with an image that's in my mind, or sometimes a word or a phrase. And almost immediately I try to think how I can expand that image to bypass my intellect. How can I say things that aren't limited to my rational way of thinking? And yet that's part of it, of course, the rational way of thinking. But that's usually how it begins, and often that first line disappears later. It's just what initiated the project.
Is it Annie Dillard has a book called The Writer's Life, and she says that often it's the favorite line, the thing that brings us into a piece of work, is a thing that has to be lost. We have to let that one go.
That's often true. I used to, when I still lived in Manitoba, I worked for the Department of Education producing films. And the cameraman used to come to the editing room really frustrated. He said, "You've cut all my favorite shots." And the editor said, "That's why." Because they disrupted the story.
You can fall in love with something.
They were in love with themselves, those shots, and just wrecked everything. So is that true of poetry or writing? Favorite lines disappear because you've fallen in love with that image or that line? I don't know. I think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
I was thinking about what you were saying about switching genres, how it might trick you into writing something else, but I can assure you, for me, I just come back to the same damn thing every time. Oh, right, another pioneer story. Right, here we are again, these certain family dramas, but I try myself, I really do. But for me, new work with fiction often starts from being out in the world and eavesdropping and traveling, and all of that stuff was not happening during the pandemic. So that, it's really a big bummer. I couldn't go to fiction at all. I edited a novel at the beginning of it, but generally with new work for fiction, I need to have some outer stimulation. Doesn't necessarily come from me, it comes from out there, an image, perhaps, but often it's a fragment of dialogue, a what if comes out.
So
but
a spark,
a
but
spark,
it's external.
Yeah. Generally,
Yeah.
it's external, whereas poetry can come from, and fiction too, but can come from a word. And often, just one word can be all it takes to kind of throw me into it, under the bus.
Thanks, Julie. Troy.
Well, for me, my writing serves Tunaka nation, Tunaka worldviews, Tunaka morality, and as a means of survival, and beyond that, as a means of achieving independence and being able to, at least from Canadian English colonialism and oppression. And so, I feel a definite. Not just an obligation, but a service and a purpose, a dedication to being able to speak and share stories which are true in our lives as Tunaka people, which we know to be true just in terms of the orality of them, or in the biography in which that we have lived through, and which have been silenced and erased. And so responsibility then is to listen and to hear stories and to hear, what people want to hear, and what we need to tell ourselves, especially in going into the future. So this story is this is something that, without getting into too much detail, has a deeply personal connection to me, because it's a true story of people in my family trying to find someone from the school, and not just to say hi to them. But I think like everybody, in terms of inspiration, I mean, I have, if they were like backyard projects of ideas, I would have, a multiplicity of bylaw infractions applied to me from wherever I live, just by the amount of things that are piling up and in my iPhone, in my, in my laptop or whatever. And I just recently, during the summer, having time to look through all this stuff, I just realized like the amount of short little ideas that I had that I just moved on and didn't think about, which is really a good exercise and a good place to be, was like, I need to go back and finish a lot of these ones. So, but really, it's about allowing creation to flow through me and to have the intention of serving the canon of Tanaka storytelling, which is gone, which is continued from now to the beginning of time, and in that there's really not a whole lot to worry about in a lot of ways, because it's something that binds us together. So, and it's a lot, and it's what keeps me living.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the last question on my list, the one that I say, and now I'm going to ask you my last question. I'll bring it up now. Is why do you write? And partly, I think, for me, it keeps me living, keeps me alive, and that I think it's what I'm hearing you saying. There's a balance between responsibility and opportunity to tell stories that have been erased, that haven't had a way to be told, and inspiration. And I think when I think of the inspiration, I think of in the interview you talked for the festival, you talked about those moments when it's just there's nothing between you and the blank page.
Right.
And that for me, I'm really curious. Does that happen for you guys very much? That's the heroine of writing for me. It's what's it like for you? That just the process of writing and getting lost in it.
Well, I can say just to jump in there that working on this story, I got to work with Lynn and Cody. As an editor through the Writers Trust, and we were going through a number of different things, and because she's like such a phenomenal short story writer, I was like, and I never really wanted to focus on short stories, so I had this one, and yeah, I whether or not it's the heroine or the rush or but yeah, I think you definitely feel that. Like I said, I just try and listen to whatever voice is there, and like you're not going to share all those things, right?
No.
I mean that would not be good.
But the subtle structure in that story, for example, every time you used humor, I knew something more about the character, but the story moved forward suddenly. Or you would throw in what I would consider the basis of a poem, like that glove compartment. I suddenly wanted to go home and write a poem about that.
Right.
Because there's whole lives that your character is discovering there, right? So you're using techniques and tactics that poets use as well. Right?
I don't really see a whole lot of difference in a lot of ways necessarily, aside from the paycheck, I guess, from fiction.
Which is bigger than a poet's.
Yeah. The Poets Union is a lot of empathy.
We're good to move on?
Well, I was just thinking about creativity, and like you say, writing keeps you alive in various ways. And when I got married, we added the words, we would support each other in sickness and health and creativity. We had to get that in there because my husband is a musician, and it was the vital thing that we had to keep going, and it still holds true. And it's true, that feeling of inflow when you're in that writing project and that blank page. Wow, yeah. It's a good rush. When you're not doing it, wow, you feel grumpy. You're not easy to live with.
Bereft. And Hiromi, you mentioned as well in one of the interviews about reaching a story wall. Is that what you called it? Or when you hit a wall where you didn't believe in stories anymore. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh dear. Well, lay it all out. No, I don't. I don't know. There's different kinds of walls at different points in life, and so there's like, you know, the walls that you hit in your relationship, like personal relationship, and then there's like the walls like hit creatively, and then you know, because these are kind of ways that we orientate to the world, like with our relationships with other people, or with you know, how we are in the world, like, by being creative or writing, or you like to make things, and that's how you are and orientate to the world. But then if you lose those things, then what's left? And then so I think, you know, hitting that wall for story was hard. But then, you know, you just kind of, I just find ways where I just, even if I can't keep on writing or creating, and it used to be a driving need, but I think it's not anymore, and that kind of scared me to think that it wasn't anymore. But then it's like, well, maybe it's just okay, because it happened, and I'm still here, and you know, the world is still beautiful, even among the disasters. And so I don't know what I'm saying. It's just like, it's just like, yeah, so you just, for me, when I couldn't stop, when I hit the wall, it was, I pivoted towards, well, if I can't create, or I don't feel the faith in creating right now, at least let me keep on learning. And so that was good. It is good.
It's scary, if that's what you've known and what you've loved and how you've known yourself in the world. But I think it sounds, I think if we can trust that it's a period of gestation and change. And you know, the other thing, you know, you were in a Zoom session the other day, and the topic was dare, which really intrigued me. And you know, one of the things you talked about was these points we come up into our lives, whether it's our writing lives, you know, just, you know, our lives, where we have to dare to try. And we don't know. It's the unknown. I guess that's the thing. It's the unknown. And it just, I think what I'm saying is, as much to myself as to anyone, is we have to trust those moments. I don't think writing's going to abandon, but it's scary when it's hard to find it.
That's why I think writing, if one can, as a writing practice, and I was just reminded of this earlier tonight, the role and the value of dreams, that when you have a dream and to write it down, that I did that for, like, you know, couple decades probably before I really started to wanted to share my writing with anybody. And as a sort of like a spiritual practice and a self-aware practice, but then realizing as it tied into some of the writing instruction I was getting at the time, particularly with Richard Wagamese, I was like, hey, this is free material all the time that's like flying right through me. And what's like, why have any judgment about it whatsoever?
Yeah.
You know, I used to do a radio show, and one of my favorite things to do on the radio show was to tell the weather, and especially to tell the weather to Victorians, which is, you know, predicting the future, but it's a future everyone knows how it is going to be no matter what. It's either going to be like the light jacket weather or the heavy jacket weather, and it's going to be stronger winds down near the Straits of Juan de Fuca. You know what I mean? And so, you know, that kind of going into the abstract with dreams, there's so much there, and it was, in fact, it was really a dream that I had when I was in law school that led me to become a writer. Like straight up, that's what happened. And I was asking for a sign for a long time, and that's basically essentially what happened. So for us to, you know, talking about like getting out of one's way of your intellect, right. There's so much there that's coming out, and whether or not it's even something that one would use, it is still the process of something coming from someplace that you have, that you know, and that you put down, and then you can let it go.
Yeah.
Do you put it down or do you shape it?
I put it down in the first person and I don't think about it, and most of the time I never look at it again. A lot of ways.
So it doesn't become a story.
Sometimes I mean, there's a couple that I remember, and I'm like, that'd be an intense story to write. But it's really, I suppose, the practice, and it's the same thing. It's like extemporaneous speaking, or music or whatever, right? So I think that's really exciting that we have that as humans, and the society kind of is like, don't pay attention to that, but listen to the weather report. Like, come on.
Yeah, when I think of the weather report, I think of Smoke Signals, the movie, and Len George was the weather guy on top of the building.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. Julie, I'm going to just swing back to something that you said, and it was a question that I had that I was interested in. Somebody said, and I can't remember who it was somebody important, that writers generally have one or two themes that they circle. And I wanted to ask you guys about that. Does that seem true to you? And if so, what are you circling? And from your first works, whatever you started writing, do you think you're still gnawing at something?
I think so. I think we have a couple of themes. Patrick Lane said that to me once too. Every writer's got 2 or 3 themes.
Maybe it was Patrick who said it.
Yeah. The thing is, you learn to write the same themes from different angles and understand them from underneath, from sideways, and so on. But yeah, you can often spot writers by their themes, right? Mm-hmm. You hear it read, you hear the rhythm of the language, but you also hear, oh yeah, that's the theme of Hemingway or whoever it is you're reading. But you're circling the same things over and over again. And I guess they're often things from pretty early in life. I don't know if everyone feels that. Do you have things, like for me, my life is composed of what I call centering events. I mean, my life has got so many random events. Think of all that I could remember and I don't. Mm-hmm. Like the millions of hours of living. So why am I remembering certain things? And I brought one along with me. Some of you will know what this is. It's a carpenter's pencil. I have it on my desk because every time I see it, I can think of my father. Because he always had his, under the side of his hat like that at work, and then he would measure things and he'd put it back up. So why would I remember that? Why is that important at all? I don't smell him. I don't see him moving. I just have this thing. So what's that process that happens there? And I could probably sit down and try and write a poem about this and see where a pencil takes me.
If what?
Where the pencil takes me in a poem. But it's ultimately just that I've made a series of associations that are in my body. They're not just memory. They're that person who happened to be my father is with me forever. And I've got this one thing that resonates always when I see it.
Do you think, I've never seen that pencil before.
Yeah, it's been on my desk for...
No, it's not.
It never comes into my room.
Do you think that there's an emotional element attached to that pencil, to the few memories that we have? I think they're emotionally not loaded, but rich.
Well, what I would say is that's an object, that's a thing I held in my hand. But that thing also is called an image.
Right.
And an image opens up like a flower. It has different resonances, different possibilities, depending which other words you put around it. And so suddenly the world opens up from this thing to an image to a bunch of ideas you didn't have to begin with. I think at least.
Julie, you said laughingly that even if you wanted to have more themes, you don't. So talk to us about
I mean, I say that a bit tongue-in-cheek, but...
what do you think you're circling, though?
I would say that, I ask a lot of questions, especially in the work I'm writing now, the creative nonfiction. I tend to, just mull on the questions of what's the best way to live, How are you the best human? What is it to be that person? And you know, what is vital, what makes things, what makes the world go round, to be very basic. But you know, that's one that comes up a lot in my nonfiction. In fiction, I can go a bunch of different places. But I think it can be dangerous when you try and write backwards. So in my first book, it was called The Jealousy Bone, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just tuck one more story about jealousy in that book, because I had no idea I was writing about jealousy until I looked at all the stories, and there was just various types of jealousy. And it was a disaster. I could not write a story about jealousy to save my life, because it was, you know, I have to, you know, you have to trick yourself, I think, into, at least I do, into figuring out what I'm writing about. I don't see that at the time. Otherwise, it becomes way too obvious. And
So is that something you wrote yourself out of, are you saying? Stories of jealousy?
I don't know if I wrote myself out of it. I don't know if I've written any more about jealousy. That's true. That's good. It's good. It's worth looking at.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's possible to write and to leave it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I hope so.
Hiromi?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of my earlier work was really exploring identity and very much exploring feminism and, you know, asserting sort of the image of Japanese Canadian or Asian Canadian women as very central to the story and taking up space. Very interested in queer bodies and lives of women, and also notions of monstrosity. A lot of my stories had brought in sort of fantastic elements or folk tales or creatures from legends, and really like to sort of explore sort of the movements between realistic fiction and fantastic and horrific, and everything in between. So, you know, these were sort of areas I really, really enjoyed exploring and writing about, and also reading as well. But there's like, again, because I came to this kind of point where there's been a shift in terms of how I can write or how I want to write right now. And just, I guess, putting myself or aspects of myself into the center of the story is just kind of boring for me now. It's kind of boring for me to do it creatively. I've done some of that several times. And that isn't to say that there isn't a lot of work to be done or that other voices shouldn't be doing that. It was just creatively for me, it's not really happening anymore. So trying to move away from sort of very human-centric narratives, and I think sort of this slide into writing creative nonfiction and the project I'm working on, which is A Little Beauty Every Day, is try to center non-human lives and sort of highlight their place in the everyday as vital and noteworthy. I don't know, this is like very random, but I think of like all the apocalypse films and stories that we see, and it's always about people. It's just like whenever I look at these films, I think, where are all the animals? Like, you know, where are all the birds? Like it's as if, like, if there's an apocalypse, there's only an apocalypse for the humans. Right. But like, where are the animal stories? And I don't mean Disney. But so I just feel like I wanted to focus more on sort of like the non-human, like right now, including stepping away from my own sense of identity, I guess. In
your story, or in your nonfiction piece, The Last Time I Saw You, is that what it's, about your sister? It's a really beautiful piece of writing. It was, I think, in Brick magazine. And one of the things that struck me is just what you're saying. It almost feels like a transition piece in some ways, because you are there, your sister, and the difficulties of a relationship are there, but so is the natural world. And it is almost another character. It has that, you talk about kinship and what you learned about kinship, not just people, but humans, plants, animals. And it's intriguing because it feels like a transition, and a lovely one. Any thoughts about theme?
Well, I'm contractually obligated to acknowledge some of the other co-sponsors to tonight's writing, which is the Department of Indian Affairs, the Department of Justice, the Oblates of St. Christopher's Union, and the Indian Agents of British Columbia, who all contributed greatly to the production of my work. So definitely a lot of my themes are reflected in
You owe them big thanks.
Yeah. Well, they get residuals. Well, they get the land. I guess we all, some people did.
Yeah.
And, well, I mean, like, there's a lot of travel in a lot of, the people are going from one place to another,
A lot of movement.
which I kind of, realized when I wrote this story. I was like, wow, my partner, Innisman Pashki, pointed that out, and I was like, wow, that's actually super true. And obviously the theme of residential schools is something that I've been writing to or around or trying to for many years. And, I think of the synchronicity of things. In your story, I know there was hippies and a mention of Christians or Christ anyhow. And that made me happy because I wasn't the only one to be talking about hippies and Christ. And I also think of the serendipity of having a story which I have personally struggled with, not just in terms of writing, but also of the knowledge that my family has lived through, and undertaking a story exactly like this, and to have it shared the night before, Orange Shirt Day, and thinking of the medicine about that, that cuts both ways, both in terms of feeling a sense of purpose and an affirmation, like a signpost along the way, but also a reflection back that I am of that. So these are all echoes that I feel. There's just so many of them, and it just never ends. The amount of stories that could be told are just, I don't really ever have an end to them. But I also, if I have an intention, it's one day to write a nice story, a story that is a wholesome and peaceful story where Tanaka people are happy. So, because that's something that I'd like to have.
What's the travel about? Is it about becoming or something?
In this story, I mean, they're leaving the territory to go find someone. What is it about? I mean, well, obviously in our territory, we've been traveling since since the creation. So I think that's, I don't know if that's something about it. It might just be all of the long road trips I've been on in my time, or I mean, the Impala that my brother had, and hearing about it and hearing how kick-ass it was. I don't really know, but just sort of thinking about whatever the themes are.
But motion or movement is important.
Yeah, it's just what's going on. I see that in a lot of the other story ideas and things I've written down recently. I'm like, oh yeah, people are traveling here, people are traveling there. So yeah.
As a reader of all your work, I'm going to, my take, just a real little one sentence at what it seems to me comes out, strikes me. Where are we here? Give me 1 second. I can hardly say this without crying. In every piece of yours I read, it seems that love is the bedrock. But it's love that's informed by immense loss. And when I read your work, often all the pieces, I'm teetering between laughter and tears. There's just not even a membrane between those two things, which is a real privilege, to read. You're a master of juxtapositions. So, travel is one thing, but the juxtaposition of what's the name of the story with the two brothers and Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy are these other two brothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Hakiahamik, that's what it was called.
all right.
Yeah.
It's magnificent. Just in it's a sideways glance. It's like Dickinson saying right at slant. The immensity of pain. I don't know how you tell that story without telling it slant. Anyway, that's partly it's just open-hearted, blasted love in your stories. Is
Dang,
what
I didn't know we were going to go there, but sure. Right on. Thank you.
Hiromi, I feel just a value on fierce independence. That you mentioned your grandmother, but it's you too. It's these characters. It's a character in Shadow Life. It's the characters in Chorus of Mushrooms. There is just a crystal clear value on independence. That's what I see. Patrick, there's something raw in your work.
Something what?
Something raw.
Wrong.
Raw, not wrong. There's something wrong in your work.
There's something wrong in it.
Should we go?
Wrong. Something raw, and an insistence on freedom, above and beyond content, form, above and beyond trying to get a perfect piece. You'll insist on freedom instead, or not instead, but it takes precedence. I see you working, your work that reaches for a place, towards us, with the sacred and the profane. It's funny, this hippie and Christianity and all of this that's coming up tonight. But that's what I see. I see an incredible desire for freedom and not to be contained. And your work isn't contained. Julie, just a reader's impression, I see a fealty to the truth, even if you become a sacrifice in that truth. It's really intriguing to me that your voice it's almost vulnerable in that you don't have a lot of armor.
Bear it all.
Yeah, that's what I see, and therefore there's a kind of intimacy that comes with that. So, them's my two bits.
We've just had a tarot reading of some sort here. The truth has come out.
And your tea leaves.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay. There are a couple of questions that I'd like to get to. See how we're doing with time here. We're good. One of the things that I think has happened with COVID is it has rendered us a captive audience. We witnessed George Floyd's murder, Chantel's murder, so many others. We saw things we couldn't distract ourselves. We were witnesses. We were witnesses to the discovery of mass graves at residential schools, and we were shocked, although we shouldn't have been, because the stories have been there for a long time. And so, I think poets like Adrienne Rich, Akhmatova, Paul Celan, they've all written about, they've witnessed, they've written about extremity and atrocity. And so I'm wondering, in this time, for you guys, for all of us, what are your thoughts about, how do you write in a time where there's so much horror, really, going on? How do you find a voice, and do you find a voice? Julie, you said you couldn't for a while.
That's right. I was bored with myself because that's all I had at that moment. And then looking to the wider world, it rendered me speechless, for much of that. And even now, it's a struggle to put words to what's really going on out there. And maybe it's not my turn as well.
Right.
So maybe it's not my turn to speak about that as well.
Yeah.
So that's okay for me to take a break.
Yeah. I guess it's the combination between, or the blend of the political and the personal. And as writers, how do you think about that?
I'll just say that when the Indigenous youth began a occupation of the legislature beginning of last year, and in support of what was happening in so many places across the country, and the demands to shut Canada down, which I wholeheartedly endorse, and that's what's happened in a lot of ways. There's been and we've had to do that, and the failure to shut down, the incapacity to shut down, the communities, the politics, the cultures that of privilege, which presume everything should be open, the terra nullius politics of Jason Kenney et al. I mean, it's been it continues to be a terrible disaster. But I mean, the apocalypse is not in the future tense or in the past tense. It's in the present tense for so many Indigenous peoples. I mean, we Tunacha are the descendants of those who survived immense amount of loss. And the only way that British Columbia has been able to exist is through the erasure of 90 to 95% of all Indigenous people who lived in this place. So I suppose that's like me getting around to a Paul McCartney song, like it's getting better all the time, It's okay to laugh at that one.
Can't get much worse.
Yeah, couldn't get much worse, exactly. Yeah, exactly. John, right on the spot, right? Like, I am the only person in my family of all my siblings who didn't go to residential school. My father and his brothers all went. I found siblings in our graveyard last year that I didn't know I had, and I remember when people asked me because I used to live in Victoria, then I moved home for quite a long time, and then I came back here, and people asked me, why did I move back? And I said, well, I moved back because it gives me 8 years longer living expectancy, and that makes me laugh, or it did, but it's also kind of true. Yeah. But I also fundamentally believe that, and this is what writers like Kim Senclip Harvey, who's a phenomenal playwright, doing their PhD in law right now, and won the Governor General's Award for their fantastic play Kamloopa, that we need to celebrate Indigenous joy and not just be focused on on trauma and retelling stories of trauma. And certainly the story that I've written is one that definitely looks at those things. But the purpose is really about the end of that journey, which I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens there, but it's about really what purpose does revenge have, or what purpose does holding on to anger really have. So I just hope that, or my expectation is that we can live a life where we can tell and testify our stories, and to ourselves first and foremost. And I'm really happy that like at UVic, there's nothing happening. The campus is closed tomorrow. Like it can be such a frustrating thing to have to you know, like, don't you like my orange shirt? It's like, it's like such a, like you talk about like the crying or laughing. It's like, that's not indigenous to me even necessarily. It's like, what are you going to say to something in those situations? So, and I guess, you know, Victoria has been the center of the empire, and is the center of the empire, is the center of fundamental ongoing oppressions that continue. So, you know, it's up to, you know, non-Indigenous peoples to, I think, a lot of ways to do something about it. So, but I will just say on a positive note that I think a space like this and seeing the programming that the Victoria Festival of Authors has demonstrated this year is an actual, like, really important contribution and offering. And Laura and her team deserve, you know, credit and recognition for that. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that. And so I'll just, you know, tip my hat to you and say, way to go. And it's good to be able to have that and share a space where we can talk about those things, because it hasn't, you know, it's not always been like that.
Absolutely.
I don't think I need to add anything.
Yeah. Troy, I'm going to follow up with a question I think that comes right out of that. I have to say the most quotable thing I read in all the festival literature was yours. And it says, it may seem a jump, but I do not underestimate the power, opportunity, and responsibility of exchanging the Indian agent for the literary agent.
Right.
And what my question that comes out of that for all of you is, what can books do? What can language do? And because it is enormously, I was thinking it should be a bumper sticker. Sorry. What can language do?
Well, circling back to, you know, my comment that at least if I can't create, then let me at least continue learning. You know, books open up worlds to me, stories, poems, you know, they provide me with connection to ideas and characters and feelings that I wouldn't necessarily arrive to on my own. And so, you know, I think it's so important to read widely outside of one's comfort zone and outside of one's personal interests. Of course, you know, you're going to fan out and read the things that you really love, but then there's like such a wide world in stories. And the thing about, you know, stories for me is that they carry all these different worlds, but they also carry feelings. And they can trip off a series of feelings inside you that had laid dormant for, you know, decades, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know, a seed that's discovered in the pyramid, and they plant it and it blooms again. It's like I feel like, you know, stories and books have the capacity to do that for us, and they're kind of like magical time traveling devices. They're just amazing.
And one of the things, I know at the Vancouver Festival you're going to be talking a fair amount about shadow life, which will be, I think, really exciting. One of the things you talked about with that book is how it's a graphic novel, how it can visually represent, just like that, a different narrative and representation, which I think is really wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
When I think of writing, I think of going back to the basics. So it was a means of communication. So really, what am I as a writer trying to do? I'm trying to tell my truth, but also, you know, to communicate a story, sometimes, and to entertain. Sometimes we haven't really talked about that very much tonight, but, you know, we've all laughed at our writing, and there can be a lot of humor and learning through that as well. So I feel, you know, language can be, you know, a very powerful tool, but at the heart of it, I think it's wanting to be heard and listening to others. So it's that give and take, the communication. And sometimes that's done with entertainment. Troy's story, laughing, crying, like you say. Yeah.
Well, language can take you anywhere. It's like riding a horse. And you ride it, and then when you least expect it, it bucks you off. And suddenly you're back to silence again, right? And I keep thinking about that when I read books by Thomas Merton or other people who experienced and focused on being silent. And that always feels to me like that's the end result of a writer's life, perhaps. Through all that excess of language, you finally arrive at nothing.
It's not
Just
so
a way
bad.
of singing.
Just,
It's a way of singing. Song runs out. You're saying you don't feel the drive anymore.
Sorry?
You were saying earlier you don't feel the same drive or necessity to write.
Yeah,
that-
not
that-
as much. Yeah.
Is that because the songs reached the last verse, or?
Oh my God, I'm not dead yet.
Fact check, correct.
Maybe I am. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next. Sometimes I say, maybe there's another novel, one more novel left in me. I don't know.
We have a friend who told us about 2 years ago that he reached the end writing, that was it.
Yeah.
And he just quit and he hasn't written.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you know that, because we
Yeah.
all have dry periods.
Yeah.
So when do you know that this is the last one?
you don't know, though. That's the thing.
He
And I
did,
think
though.
that's why it's so scary. Well, yeah, I guess he did.
He came to that conclusion, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've written myself out.
That's not what I hear with you, Hiromi.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
still in the I don't know waters.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. There's lots of fish there.
But that's where changing genres helps.
Yeah.
It does. It does. Yeah.
You're using language differently.
Yeah.
I'm just going to look and see if there's any more I have lots of questions here, but we don't have a lot of time. Okay, so I'll ask you. Do you guys have any quirky, this is like one of those, what do they call that Proust questionnaire that I
Right,
hate?
yeah.
I hate it.
Right, yeah.
I actually looked at the questions of the Proust questionnaire, and there was not one that I could put you, I couldn't answer them, so I wasn't going to do it to you. But my question to you is, do you have any quirky habits? Do you have any, writers are often superstitious. Who was it? Schiller kept rotting apples in his drawer. And he couldn't write without the smell
That's a
of...
weird habit.
He didn't think so. You only write on blue paper.
That's cool,
quirky?
though. I like that.
Yeah. I forget who else it was. There was someone who had yellow paper, I think...
Yeah.
Yeah, who was that? Yellow paper for prose, pink for poetry, something, quirky. Steinbeck kept 12 sharpened pencils on his desk. Do you guys turn in circles before you go in your room? What do you do? Anything quirky? Or anything, not just quirky, but...
I have
Like
to
a ritual.
Hey?
Kind of like a ritual or like
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I have to have something to drink and music on to write.
Ah,
I don't write in silence,
Yeah.
usually.
And these days
And
that
I
drink...
need to drink hot chocolate
It's hot
these
chocolate,
days,
yeah.
or used to be whiskey, it used to be rum, used to be whatever. Just to sip at something. It's like keep yourself liquid.
Right. And so that's sort of it's that ritual that helps you enter it.
And then all the rituals of not writing.
Yes.
Like, oh, it's too hot, turn the thermostat down.
Yeah.
Half an hour later, turn it up, it's too cold. Or what my favorite used to be, I was a single dad for many years, was doing the laundry. I always chose to do that when I had writer's block, right? Where's the next? Got to do the laundry.
Yeah.
And then I'd hear it walked across the floor in my basement. It was off balance somehow. I didn't load it correctly.
Oh.
And so when I heard it coming nearer to me, then I knew it's time. Set it right again, and all those little rituals.
Yeah.
Or my sock had some honey on it when I walked to the kitchen. anything not to write.
Yeah, anything. Julie, any quirky things?
No, I try not to get too prescriptive about a routine, but lately I've been trying to sort of take myself, put myself off balance, right? Just come sideways. That's how I've been thinking about writing. So just thinking of it as part of the day, writing, reading,
or
eating,
jotting down in your notes.
jotting down the notes. Yes, so yeah, that kind of thing. But I will say that my one writing practice that I've been doing for many, many years is that I exchange words with other writers through email. So we've been doing what we call them writemans, and we have been giving each other writemans for a long time.
Great.
And then we write for 10 minutes on that one word, or we maybe let them pile up for 3 or 4 days, and then send it to each other. That's it. And we just say, wow, it's amazing, and then we move on.
Oh, that's great.
So I've written whole stories that
Whether
way.
or not something comes out of that is great.
That's right. Yeah, but whole stories have been written with consecutive words, so it can be fun to do that.
Yeah, because I think that's part of what I'm asking really is what gets you into it.
Yeah.
How do you enter it? Yeah. Troy, are you quirky?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I definitely find there's writing and there's also editing, right? So there's a difference between my mentality. Editing is definitely I suppose improved, or like recently with the most recent edit on the first major edit of this work with my editor at the Walrus. I made a pact with myself to not get upset at anything they happen to say, because it's you're talking like there's a huge cultural chasm, and it's like it could be real. It's like just have some faith, and then also accept whatever the very first suggestion to cut. So going back to that, and it was the first line that got me writing, which was basically a description of this character saying that the only thing that I could possibly think of that kept me going through being in that school, through all the nuns and the priests and what was to find Brother Francis and to choke him to death with my bare hands. And I love that line. I love reading it. I love saying it. I love just like inhabiting that space. And then it was like, they're like, we should cut that because it's too like it just explains everything. And I was like, you already said you'd do that, so I already committed to, and it was a good move, right? I feel like that made sense. I find like the what I write or how I can write is so it changes on the seasons, especially what seasons there are here in this land versus say where we come from, where there's very intense seasons. Well, it's intense here, I guess, but it's like not a very deep summer in a lot of ways, and there's no snow, which is one of the reasons why I guess I live here. But I find that listening to baseball games on the radio in like late April, early May is like instant inspiration. I just put that on. I'm listening to someone, the ball is hit foul. And like it's super slow and like,
and all the stories they tell.
Yeah,
too, right?
and it's just like it goes right into the subconscious, and I'm just like taken away. Or there's a specific song or an album that I listen to, which is all Ravel piano. So it's all works by him, but just on piano. And I probably have sat down and written to that like 1,000 times. You know what I mean? Like I don't even think about it anymore. I just know if I put that on, that whatever I'm working on will get me into that space.
That's fantastic.
And it's just like it's so perfect. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah. Another thing I do is I have to move. I'm not very good at AOC, ass on chair. It's 20 minutes is a pretty long time to sit still in the chair. And I like to live in a house that has stairs so I can go up and down.
I also like writing standing up. Is that piece that you talked about. I wrote that in one go, standing up.
Oh, interesting.
And we were given a writing assignment.
Hemingway wrote standing up.
Yeah, I
didn't
read
he?
that, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
he also said, write drunk, edit sober, or something.
Right.
I haven't tried that, but
Yeah.
the standing one, I'm like, I can do that. So,
Yeah, that's interesting.
It does engage if you're engaging all elements of what you have, then why not?
Are there certain times of day that everyone prefers writing?
Yeah, well, when I was developing my writing craft and my writing career, at the time I was a young mother. And then so I had my children's, all their childhood. And I was writing alongside their childhood. And so the writing time was night because that's when it was quiet. And so the best time to write was between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., which is like the stillest, kind of quietest time. And I could just get into that world or into that zone. And there's a lot of dark space that was very rich with, possibility. So that quiet, dark time was the best. So, my children are all grown, but I still, for the life of me, I can't write during the day. I just like putz around like, oh, I gotta write, and then not be able to write. And then it's like coming around to 11 o'clock, say, oh, I'm gonna sit down now. And then I can, it's now a part of the whole process. It has to be dark, quiet, quietest part of night. Lately I've been listening to chill hop on YouTube, and apparently this is what the young people listen to while they do their homework. It's a thing, but it's actually really good for writing because it's kind of like great. A little. It's not so intrusive. It's kind of like electronic music, but it's not like doom doom doom. It's not like that. It's not like house, but it's just kind of chill, and it goes in the back. I can't listen to music with lyrics in it because I start singing. The words are kind of like fish hooks, and I can't have fish hook words snagging me. So yeah.
I think we have. I think we've run out of time. Is that right, Laura? Oh, thank you, guys. This has been. I was petrified, by the way. I thought it was just going to. I was petrified. Thank you. You're all wonderful. Your writing is wonderful, and thank you, guys, for being here. Just had a lovely, intimate feel. I'd like to remind everyone. Troy's mentioned it a couple of times that it's the inaugural National Day for Truth and Reconciliation tomorrow, Orange Shirt Day. So in whatever ways, I think CBC all day is doing, their programming. Whatever ways we have to engage with this, to learn, I encourage us all to do that. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending this event. And thank you especially to our moderator and authors, Eve Joseph, Patrick Friesen, Hiromigoto, Julie Paul, and Troy Sebastian. That was really fantastic.
Thank you.
If you're interested in purchasing any of the books featured today, they're available from the Monroe's table just over there. Our authors will be able to sign them for you. But just a reminder that in order to respect COVID protocols, we ask that you maintain a safe distance from one another and remain at your table or your seat until there's a clear path to visit the book table or to exit the venue. And although we'd truly love for you to share your thoughts about the event and chat together here, we're going to ask that any socializing between attendees happens outside the building for safety. There are many more events during the festival, so please refer to your program. Many in-person events have sold out, but all events are available to watch online. Our website features Q&As, you've heard about some of those tonight, as well as all the authors participating in BFA 2021 have had those Q&As up on the website. There's a place for you to sign up for our newsletter, so please do refer to our website, victoriafestivalofauthors.ca. If you would like to support the festival in another way, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and we encourage you and your friends to attend or you could encourage one of your friends to attend an upcoming event. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or on VFA's page at Canada Helps. Your donations will help keep VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you again, and sincere thanks to everyone tonight. Thank you.